Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Shubh, and welcome back to another episode. I wanted to do something interesting today. I kind of enjoyed the way I got a sort of free-flowing conversation in my last episode about documentaries, but I figured I'd go the complete opposite this time. Maybe not the complete opposite, but a sort of foil to what the complete antithesis of documentary films are now. The antithesis of documentary films, in my opinion, are these huge, big-budget CGI, Jumanji, Rampage, Planet of the Apes, Avengers types of movies. While I'm a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you won't find anyone who's seen Thor Ragnarok as much as I have. There's something about these movies that you go in, even though you buy into the spectacle and you suspend your disbelief, that is fantastical. What makes the movies that I want to talk about so great today are the fact that they are real, and they're real. Well, perhaps maybe not the first few, but the last few certainly have been. And these movies are the Mission Impossible movies. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the Mission Impossible movies, and then I'll move into a ranking system. So just give you sort of my thoughts on which ones I liked, what I felt about them, how the fact that this franchise literally cannot miss, and has not missed, and will not miss, with the exception of maybe one film. But let's get into it. So, the Mission Impossible movies started off as a reboot of an old TV show in 1996 with Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible, the first one, starring Tom Cruise. These movies, in the beginning, they were defined as, it was sort of like an entry point. Tom Cruise has become a huge star at this point. He started his career in 1981, and from then to 96, he sort of rose from obscurity. And a lot of his films, they were these, characters where he played either, a character where he's the best at something, but people doubted it, and eventually he proved them wrong. Or he played along as a supporting role to legendary actors. Tom Cruise at this point wanted to be the best, so he learned from the best, naturally, right? But in 96, after he teamed up with his producing partner, Paula Wagner, he started to work with the best directors to make the best films. Hence, 96 is Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible. And that's pretty much what started all of this. From then on, he started playing these characters that seem like they're the best, but begin to lose everything and have to grow as a result. And that's sort of what stemmed this franchise almost. Each of these films, they feel distinct. They're idiosyncratic based on the filmmaker. And the series has this almost complete disregard for continuity. It takes fragments from the original source material, but in the first film, spoiler alert, they kill off the main character from the TV show. It basically allowed these filmmakers to come in and give their own fresh take on a spy movie. But what separates it all is this analog filmmaking. All these movies are shot on film. And insane stunt work. Brian De Palma's film, it follows Ethan Hunt, played by Tom Cruise, and his mentor, Jim Phelps, who he sees as his father figure. They go on a covert assignment that takes this disastrous turn. Phelps is killed, and Ethan becomes the prime murder suspect. His first sort of rogue appearance. Now, as a fugitive, Hunt recruits this brilliant hacker Luther, played by Ving Rhames, and maverick pilot Franz Krieger, played by Jean Reno, to help him sneak into a heavily guarded CIA building to retrieve a confidential computer file that will prove his innocence. But the story doesn't matter. Right? This is a movie where Brian De Palma gets to show off who he is. He gets all the zooms in. There's a conversation scene that every shot is shot from below the characters on a Dutch tilt. It's a very Brian De Palma film. But it's also a movie that's about the thrill of danger and the tension that keeps everyone on edge. And that became the characteristic of most of the Mission Impossible films, at least up to 4. These movies are about following Ethan Hunt, who sort of jumps around in character here and there. His life is changed from year to year. It's not the only thing consistent is the fact that Tom Cruise is doing wild stuff. And Luther is in each movie. But that's the thing, you don't necessarily get a sense of who Ethan Hunt is. Ethan Hunt is the lead character in these 6 movies, but he has seemingly no defining character traits and really no discernible backstory. We seem to know nothing about this guy. The Mission Impossible films they rely on this real filmmaking and the craft of what it should be like. And Tom Cruise is also like that. He has this intense hatred for the way things look on digital film. And he will go beyond the realms of reality to give audiences the authentic experience. In some ways, I would really enjoy if Christopher Nolan made a Mission Impossible film. That would be quite fun. But that sort of drive, that perseverance is what Ethan Hunt is. In Mission Impossible 1, in terms of growth and character traits, Ethan Hunt starts off as this young and cocky IMF agent. He's got a mother, he's got a dead dad, his family owns a dairy farm. Mostly implies that he's probably got a dull upbringing. Chances are to end up in a place like the IMF, he probably had to go to a good college where he did well. Probably had to be in the military for a while. And eventually would have been recruited by the IMF. And here's where he sort of finally gets his friends and family figures. In Jim Phelps, he finally gets that father figure. But then on a mission, his whole team and Phelps die. Right? He loses his only friends. He loses his father figure. And he freaks out. And he hooks up with his father figure's wife, which is very weird. But then again, Phelps's wife Claire, and Jean Reno, his character, they all betray him. The only person left is Luther. In Mission Impossible 2, we come back to see Ethan, who's been so scarred that he starts going all free solo on this bunch of cliffs with no safety gear. But Luther's still around. Chances are at this point, Ethan would have sort of stayed, within the bounds of being alone and, focusing on being an agent. But he would have obviously studied human behavior because he understands how to seduce and manipulate in order to get what he wants. And he falls in love with a new woman. But the fact that he has no friends shows that whenever he can get to know someone at this point, like Tandy Newton's character, he latches on in an obsessive way. There's clearly something wrong with this guy at this point. Mission Impossible 2 is the only bad movie in this series. It defines what makes the series great, though. Because John Woo, the director, makes this one of his own films. So much so, like Guy Ritchie did with The Gentleman, it seems like a parody of his own style of filmmaking. It becomes a vehicle for John Woo. It doesn't create danger like most of these films usually do, but it essentially just tries really hard to look really cool. The movie doesn't go globe-trotting like the rest of the film, like the other films. Yeah, it feels like a loose remake of Hitchcock's Notorious. It stays within the Australian suburbs. Kind of looks like and feels like these Hindi action movies that I used to grow up on. The series at this point, we know that there's no connection except for Tom Cruise. Because this is the hardest left turn that anyone could have made at this point with a film franchise. But at the same time, this film also sets up the tentpoles of the franchise. Such as, The Mask. Like, obviously there are masks in the first one. But in the second one, in the first one, it's a bit more representative of something. In the second one, the mask has a trade-off of nothing. It's not like the first one where you can have a mask but not the voice. In the second one, you can just wear a mask and assume someone else's identity with no abandon. In the second one, it doubles down on Ethan's obsession with the obsession of doing something the most impossible way possible. And it creates the idea that Mission Impossible is just a franchise that essentially feels the need to explain and humanize the completely erratic and ludicrous John Woo film from then on. And that happens with J.J. Abrams in Mission Impossible 3. He shows where, like, for example, with the mask thing, he shows that the voice thing comes from a recording of a sound of someone else. He shows that Ethan's obsession is also not just sort of erratic, but calculated. It starts the science behind the magic. But even then, we go back to the idiosyncrasies of the filmmaker. Because it's a J.J. Abrams film, there has to be some form of family tension or dynamic. And suddenly he has a private life with a woman who's completely normal. Michelle Monaghan. It seems his mother's passed away at this time, but Luther's still there, at least. And Ethan is trying to get out of the spy life. He's no longer in the field, but in the normal parts of his life, you can still see that he's obsessive, he's hyper-competent, he's hyper-competitive, he's super intense. And his spy life eventually comes back. But at the end of the day, you find out that he's at balance with his spy life and his personal life. This is the first time Ethan Hunt dies in the series. This is J.J. Abrams' film. It adds that dual life aspect like he did with Alias. It's a completely new Ethan Hunt. There's the explanations. There's all the lens flares that you can ask for. And there's Philip Seymour Hoffman. A lot of people don't give enough credit to Philip Seymour Hoffman's character in this because he creates someone who has literally no care for Ethan Hunt. Like the rest of the series, all of the villains, you get the sense that they think that Ethan Hunt is a formidable rival. In this film, Philip Seymour Hoffman's character makes it seem like he's just a bug on his shoulder. And that's the scariest part. After this film, though, for a while, Tom Cruise seemed to, be losing his traction in the public. He got locked up. In other movies, he started to get looked over, and Paramount was thinking of pulling him out of the franchise. So he brought in Brad Bird for Ghost Protocol. Brad Bird, best known for movies like The Incredibles and Ratatouille. Um, and the story is pretty much, again, it's just a setup to get him to climb down the Burj Khalifa. But one thing that Brad Bird does do is he makes this movie about making the stakes bigger. This movie is the movie where Ethan Hunt and his characters really earn the victory. And again, it's sort of representative of Tom Cruise sort of earning it back. Alright, let's take a quick break here. We'll be back with more on the first couple of Mission Impossible movies and some more breakdown of characters and trends. Later, I'll be ranking my top 2 Mission Impossible films.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
This movie is about how Ethan has now faked his wife's death for her safety. He realizes that he can't have regular human relationships. He throws himself obsessively into his work. He spends 6 months in a Russian prison. And he risks his life constantly doing just insane things. Between the missions, obviously, he still meets up with Luther, his only friend. Interestingly enough, behind this film, there were a bit of issues, with production insurance. Essentially, production insurance is a production company will take out insurance in case, the star of your movie falls off the tallest building in the world. And you then don't have a movie because you lost your star in shooting. Now, naturally, no insurance company would want Tom Cruise climbing down the Burj Khalifa. But it's Tom Cruise, The guy's crazy. He gets his producing partner to fire the insurance company and find someone that would insure the stunt. Silent films like Buster Keaton didn't have to deal with stuff like that. Buster Keaton would just jump out of a building and break his back and no one would be the wiser. After this, I don't think there's ever going to be another actor that would probably get away with this. Ever. This film is also full of, really cool gags, like about how technology doesn't work. This makes it one of the funniest films in the franchise as well. But it shows that the only functioning thing in this movie and in the story are the human team, the human touch. This movie is about how humans and a collaboration are more important than anything else than technology. Then we enter the McQuarrie era. At this point, Tom Cruise and Chris McQuarrie, they've become sort of frequent collaborators to no end. Tom Cruise will have him fix up literally anything. He fixed up the script for Ghost Protocol as well. And this is his directorial debut in the series. This film, number 5, Rogue Nation, it's about Ethan Hunt. It's about his difficulty trusting people. It's about his failure to maintain relationships. They've all led him to create this just obsessive nature to this job. He will do anything to complete this mission. And that's where this character has come at this point. He will do anything to win. This movie, he dies again, the second time in the series. And his teammates finally start to catch on, realizing that he will die for this cause. The film realizes that Ethan Hunt isn't just insane, he's obsessed. Number 5 is the glue of the franchise. It reaches back to all of the original films. It ties up every single loose end. In Rogue Nation, you go beyond anything else. You know, Tom Cruise is hanging off a plane within the first bits of the movie. He comes in completely running. It adds Ilsa Faust, you know, the best character in the series, a female Ethan Hunt, but at the same time a foil to Ethan Hunt. She isn't objectified. She has her own narrative. She creates our understanding that Ethan Hunt is just a crazy person who's obsessed and will fanatically do anything. He never objects to anything. And all of the characters in this film join him as he starts off running and hangs off of a plane, and just let him do his thing, because at the end of the day, no mission is impossible enough. With McQuarrie's films, we get a sense of cohesion. You know, in Fallout, the sixth film, he finally ties up the last loose end, which is Ethan's wife, Julia. You can see that Ethan's choices finally have consequences. You know, these Mission Impossible movies are the movies that are representative and personifications of the people that create them. In an interview, Christopher McQuarrie said that you know, he comes into production with about a third of the film sort of written out and most of it outlined, and the action sequences and stuff are sort of developed in person while they're on set. Sometimes, you know, even having to write for a scene that they have to shoot the next day. When you look at the film, you know, you look at these action sequences and you're like, oh, there's no way that they organized that in a day, and chances are they might have. But that's what these films are. You know, these films are about crazy people that come together and work together to create something completely impossible. Like these movies, they go through trials and they come out on top. These films, at the end of the day, they're about a man with a purpose who starts off young and sees his purpose sort of slowly unraveling while those he loves either die, betray him, or are put into danger by him. There's only one constant: the mission. And Ethan Hunt is Tom Cruise, you know. It chronicles his own progression as a star and a celebrity. Because in the 90s, he's a hotshot, same way he was in the first film. In the second and third, you see him as the star. Because in 2000s, he was a star. You know, he was the most famous star on the planet. And the third one takes that beyond, because he was then, after getting married to Katie Holmes, known as the family guy. And that's what we see in the third film. We see sort of going back into a family situation. But in the fourth film, he goes back to what he is. Just a crazy weirdo. Tom Cruise and Ethan Hunt are the same person. They are manic, and they're crazy, and they will do whatever it is to make their things come true. That's best displayed in the fact that Tom Cruise does his own stunts. Okay, for example, Tom Cruise had to log 2,000 flight hours. Well, okay, he's already a trained pilot, right? But for Fallout, for a helicopter scene, he learned how to fly a helicopter and then mastered stunt helicopter flying by doing 2,000 hours of stunt flying over years, sometimes even practicing flying for 16 hours in a day and then going on to shoot for 4 more hours. That scene is so difficult that most master pilots didn't even want to do it. You know, the Burj Khalifa stunt. The guy fired an insurance company so he could climb on top of the biggest building in the world. That's just what it is. Tom Cruise is known for running in his movies. You know, even his bio on Twitter says running in movies since, I don't know, like 84. But his running is symbolic of his focus. You know, he runs in such a rigid manner. Everything stays still, except for his hands and legs, obviously. You know, his neck is tensed, his body is completely straight, and he's looking directly at what he's going for. That's Ethan Hunt. That's Tom Cruise. There's an obsession to do everything in the cleanest, most honest, and realist type of way. But every one of these movies is also about collaboration. The first film is about a failure to collaborate. Film history is going to remember this series because it creates joy. We go into the cinemas and we watch it and we love it. It's going to remember this series because it made Tom Cruise America's best export. Anyway, let's begin ranking them. So at number 6, obviously we're going to put Mission Impossible 2. John Woo, the easiest way to do what he does is just get a mishmash of a bunch of random action film tropes, like viruses and stock options and just a bunch of other boring narrative ideas. The first things that will come to your mind if you were trying to write a movie write a Mission Impossible type of movie. Thandie Newton is good in this film. She's cool. She's dangerous. There's a lot of double crossing. She's very Bond girly, and she's the most Bond girly among all of Ethan's love interests over the films. But she's also pretty interesting. She's genuinely interesting. She's a thief in the way Catwoman was. She has a good heart. She's cool. She's very good. She's got a very good poker face. But all of that sets aside, and it does nothing with that. It just makes her a love interest for Ethan. One that we'll never see again. Obviously the film, it has its merits. It's got that motorcycle chase with Ethan and Dougray Scott. Not enough doves for a John Woo movie, but still a classic. Obviously that wouldn't be the best motorcycle chase. That'd be Rogue Nation. But the same thing's said about the opening stunt, Ethan dangling off a massive wall, throwing his sunglasses that burn into the Mission Impossible title card. That's what this film is. It's just a bunch of nutty sequences and set pieces that are cool at the time, but kind of outdated by its successors. Especially when its successors are hell-bent on making every film bigger and crazier than the last. At number 5, I'm going to put Mission Impossible 3. J.J. Abrams, out of all the major filmmakers and blockbuster filmmakers in the world, he's the only one who started his career with a blockbuster. He had a huge TV career before this. Obviously, he had Alias and Lost and Felicity, but we don't talk about Felicity. And you can see that in the fact that this is a tighter and more plot-driven film, especially from a franchise where story doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, someone jumping out of a building is all you're going to remember of it. It's the first one to develop Ethan Hunt outside of just a cool guy. There's a bunch of MacGuffin stuff with the rabbit's foot, but it doesn't matter as much as Ethan and his new Achilles heel, his wife, Julia. That relevance, that decision-making, it impacts the rest of the movies for the future. The final showdown in this film, it's got this clever variation of what is essentially just a boring trope in these movies now, in the bomb defusing sequence. And one of the best aspects of it is Tom Cruise running across literally all of China. But he's not the star of the show in this film. That belongs to Philip Seymour Hoffman, like I said. He's the best villain in these films. He's cold-blooded. He's got a relentlessly calm demeanor. He's eerie. He's real. And any other actor would have shown him as just another cardboard bad person. But Philip Seymour Hoffman really, really did it justice. At number 3, I have the first Mission Impossible. When you think of the first Mission Impossible, you think of the most memorable image of the films. It's Tom Cruise, wearing specs, glasses, hanging off of a wire as he catches a drop of sweat as it falls off of him, attempting to hack into a computer with some weird floppy disk stuff. This is in the 90s. It's before people knew what hacking was. I still don't know what hacking is, to be honest. He's all nerves, he's feared, but he's also confident in the rest of the film. It's a funny scene, it's a bold scene, it's clever, it's different, it's what made it what it is. But it's not even the best sequence in the film. It opens with one of the most amusing bits in any Mission Impossible films. It's this really fancy piece of misdirection that introduces Ethan Hunt, but also his compatriots, Kristen Scott, Estevez, and then he just kills all of them off in order to dig into a story of double crossing that any series would love to have among its ranks. It became eventually a very familiar aspect in these films. You push Ethan against a wall and have him prove his loyalty to people who don't deserve it, honestly. The film, it ends with an entertaining, improbable action set piece that the franchise just makes better every movie. It's a race between a train and a helicopter. And it's crazy, but it set the stage for what was to come. Obviously, Tom Cruise now would do it himself, but, that was a different time. At number 3, we have Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. Rogue Nation, the best part of this film is Rebecca Ferguson, who plays Ilsa Faust. But she had this breakout performance as this undercover MI6 agent and gave the franchise what it needed, a female voice that wasn't just a love interest. She can go toe-to-toe with Tom Cruise, and she has this magnetic charisma. And still, she wasn't the thing that made this film what it is. Christopher McQuarrie, the director of this film, made it what it is. He constructed this narrative very tightly. It made Rogue Nation a refreshing and unpredictable thriller. It was one of the best. It was the best at its time. He took Mission Impossible more than just old-fashioned. He took the sort of outrageous, old-fashioned, cartoonish elements that Barry Baird used in the last film and made it into a sort of weird hybrid of Hitchcock and James Bond, and has some of the best set pieces. The best motorcycle chase. That opera scene is crazy. The final chase between Solomon Lane and Ethan Hunt. It's just a great film. Alright, stay tuned for number 2. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
welcome back. We just ranked the bottom 4 Mission Impossible films, and I gave you a little bit of recap on my thoughts and sort of dissected the series a little bit. Let's talk about my number 2 pick. So number 2 is the film that brought me into the series for the first time. I remember watching this film in the theaters. It was my first ever IMAX movie. And I don't regret it whatsoever because it just blew me away. This film is Mission Impossible 4, Ghost Protocol. Though I guess this is also the first film in the series to not use a number. So I guess it's just Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Anyway, it was as worth it as it was to see a film in IMAX. Because you get this insane, incredible action storyteller who just slams you around the screen for a couple of hours. Brad Bird, as I said, he made the leap from animation classics like The Incredibles and Ratatouille into Mission Impossible. And, I guess there's this sort of joke at the way these IMF agents sort of wince and fume on ledges or hovering over blades or, in one case, at the top of the tallest building in the world because they're in the hands of a god in the animation world who's used to doing this to cartoon characters. Brad Bird's sense of humor, it creates this movie into what it is. It's a bunch of wonderful fun. One of those things is, like I mentioned, the fact that Brad Bird seems to hate technology in this film. This film is full of gags about how the technology in the series just doesn't and shouldn't work. The prison that Tom Cruise is in is vulnerable to hacks, hence that's how he gets out. Henway's super advanced contact lens is what leads to his assassination because despite it being super advanced, he still has to check his phone to make sure that the woman approaching him is about to assassinate him or not. The self-destruct in the mission brief doesn't work, which is by far my favorite mission brief in the entire series. I think Plain TV is probably second to that. There's a little bit of a sequence, one of the best sequences in terms of technology in the film, where Benji and Ethan set up this sort of projector screen to get past the Kremlin security. And obviously it doesn't work because it's so over-designed. Even the sort of smallest piece of technology in this film, which is Ethan's reversible military to bomber jacket, eventually causes him to get caught by the police in the hospital. The retina scan on the side of a moving train, I don't even have to explain why that's probably going to fail. And Dubai, the whole sequence is, like every sequence in Dubai is just a bunch of failures. The face printer stops working, and because of that, Ethan has to climb into the world's tallest building, off like the sides of the world's tallest building, Whereas the gloves fail, the magnetic gloves that keep him attached twice. The only thing that functions in this movie is it's the human team. It's a way of the movie showing that collaboration is way more important than technology, which is essentially what these movies are pretty much about. Each of these movies is about working with a team. It's also just completely in a different league to the other Mission Impossible films. They're not bad, the other ones, but most of them were sort of deformed by ego, let's say. The first films were about Ethan Hunt. They weren't about the team. The first few films were Ethan Hunt being this sort of lone wolf going one-on-one against his latest supervillain. It was like a James Bond adjacent, but these directors did what they could, but at the end of the day, it was a Tom Cruise film. But in Ghost Protocol, the shift goes back to the team. It's the last thing you expect from Cruise, who's supposed to be this control freak. I don't know. I have no idea. The writers bring 3 new characters into the play. Simon Pegg and Benji. Paula Patton's vengeful Jane Carter, and perhaps the most intriguing, Jeremy Renner as this anxious analyst, William Brandt, who finds himself on Ethan's team when his boss is assassinated. Basically, at this point, the IMF doesn't exist. Ethan and his friends are all fugitives because the government invokes Ghost Protocol. And because they accidentally blew up the Kremlin, they're pretty much fugitives. Now, essentially, the plot, like most films in this series, are that a madman wants a nuclear war so that Earth can start over, and he's very determined. But, like all of these films say, Hunt is uniquely trained and highly motivated. And so are his teammates. The first and most interesting Kremlin robbing operation turns out to be the easiest. Ethan and his team then have to scale the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. They have to outrun a dust storm, and eventually go to Mumbai and have a climactic car chase with 3 minutes to launch this nuclear weapon. I mean, it's Mission Impossible, right? Eventually, you see that there's this sort of comical conceit running through the film. There's a marveling at the precision and craziness of the gizmos, and they're sort of better than James Bond films. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you. But as I said, when all of these things stop working, we just laugh at it. Essentially, Brad Bird has this idea that even the best laid out plans can become the worst case scenarios. Things work, but also things also don't at some point. And Ghost Protocol is a tribute to having some form of grace under pressure. It's surprising how often Cruise honestly throws the ball to Jeremy Renner in this. Maybe Cruise is in damage control mode, trying to make us forget at this point his Scientology PR and that Night and Day movie. But he's hugely likable as Jeremy Renner's coach on this film. And Jeremy Renner's "What Am I Doing Here" sort of vibe, it's a gift for the comedy of this film. Simon Pegg, as usual, is the funniest person on these films. I'll catch you. He keeps telling Jeremy Renner at some point, sort of terrified at this idea of plunging down into the world's biggest fan. Paula Patton is incredible in this film. Her stunt doubles naturally earn their pay. There's a few interesting ideas in that could have been sort of developed a little bit more. Brandt doesn't have a very good backstory. It would have been nice to have a little bit more of Sawyer from Lost. He just dies in the first minutes. The climax of the film reminded me of Inception a little bit, but Brad Bird and his editor have a more clean and elegant sort of juggling of multiple ideas of action at this point. The finale is in an automated parking garage in Mumbai, and it has this sort of Donkey Kong like falling and rising elevators with suspense heightening, and naturally all of that is to do with the Mission Impossible theme and IMAX. IMAX is like MSG for these films. You know, you have the long, crazy traveling shots over the desert showing Dubai. You have shots viewing from above Tom Cruise's head, looking down at 130 stories. And you know at the end of the day that you're just going to enjoy being up there and watching this film. Unlike Ethan Hunt, who probably didn't enjoy being 130 stories up in the air with a malfunctioning glove. And finally, stay tuned for number 1. We're going to be right back.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Alright, now at number 1, I feel like you probably already figured out which one it's going to be because there's only one left, and that is the last one, Mission Impossible Fallout, number 6 in this series, the biggest, the best, the brightest. You see, everything works out in this film. You know, when you look back, Mission Impossible as a franchise sort of seemed to be getting a bit tired and outdated. And this is between the 3rd and 4th films when audiences, you know, they weren't sure whether they were dealing with a trilogy or an open-ended anthology series. Tom Cruise was being too open about his Scientology in public, and he did make a very brilliant cameo in Tropic Thunder, showing up in a fat suit and a bald cap, but retreated in the other direction, refusing to let go of his image as this eternal 20-something. All of the signs pointed towards sort of a time for Ethan Hunt to retire. Lucky for us, he didn't, because since then, the films have just gotten better. These films just get better and better because Ethan Hunt has become more of a character. You know, he's acquired this gravitas along the way that changes and distinguishes this series from its inspirations, I guess you could call them, like the James Bond movies from the 60s when Sean Connery was in charge. It's playing to these audiences that don't realize that it was from a campy TV series from the 60s. And Fallout it's not just another stunt-driven sort of save-the-world bonanza. I mean, it is, obviously, but at the same time, it takes us across Paris and London and Kashmir, but at the same time, there's Christopher McQuarrie. He's back. For the first time ever, we have a repeat director in the series. And with that, Tom Cruise, you can get a more loose and sort of comfortable acting experience from Tom Cruise, because not only is Christopher McQuarrie this sort of frequent collaborator of his, but also having been on set, having sort of dealt with the process that he brings to this, you can see that comfort in this film more than any other films. But this time, Christopher McQuarrie does everything that his last film didn't. He ties the last loose end. He makes the movie personal. Despite the fact that Tom Cruise is 55 in this film, you can see he's got a few wrinkles in the corner of his eyes, and that he's not on his first trip down to what he's doing. And that's what makes Fallout what it is. The movie's aware of Hunt's previous experience. It incorporates that into the narrative. The villain is someone we've seen before. It's Solomon Lane, played by Sean Harris. There's a reference to a character from the first movie, Vanessa Redgrave. There's a reference to Michelle Monaghan from Mission Impossible 3. Ilsa Faust is back from the last one. And it brings the masks back in a very contriving way of the 96 film, where any character could rip off their face and reveal who they were at any point. Now they function as a sort of nostalgia. You know, you get CIA Director Sloan, she calls IMF a Halloween, a bunch of grown men in rubber masks playing trick or treat. She's not wrong, you know. There's a cheeky ability to impersonate anyone, but that's basically what sets Mission Impossible apart. These are movies that, you know, they want you to question what you see, and they double down on that by doing so many risky maneuvers, practically and otherwise. You know, at this point, we'd come to a point where we thought that everything had been seen before. Ethan Hunt had jumped here and there from rocks and cliffs and fallen out of a plane and escaped a Russian jail, dodged exploding helicopters, driven motorcycles, but never before has the scenery been more spectacular. You know, he's standing on top of the chimney at the Tate Modern in London, parachuting onto the glass roof of Paris's Grand Palais. The pristine white bathrooms of the Grand Palais in Paris have the most memorable scene, a sort of strangely homoerotic encounter between Ethan Hunt and CIA assassin August Walker, played by Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill is a very interesting porn stash that sort of adds to that feeling. You know, and they attempt to corner a nefarious arms dealer named John Lark in the men's room. You know, Fallout, it's a clear mission, but like most of these movies, the story doesn't really matter as much as the set pieces. Regardless, there's 3 plutonium cores that Ethan gives up on account of his inability to prioritize the many lives in front of the one. And a terrorist organization known as the Apostles, basically the Syndicate 2, want to use them to target the Vatican, Jerusalem, and Mecca, the 3 places of Abrahamic religion, in a single coordinated attack. But Christopher McQuarrie doesn't keep it that simple. You know, he makes it complicated. He gets the plutonium to go missing naturally, and he puts Hunt and his team, Luther and Benji, along with Ilsa, on a desperate race to recover the nuclear devices before they can be used. There's a trick here. It's to steer this action through these scenic locations. You know, you bring all these outdoor chases wherever possible. There's one through Paris, where probably the best outdoor chase in Paris since the French Connection. And it finds creative ways to keep the stakes grounded in these relationships that have been established for the last 5 films. Like, maybe not all 5, but at least the last couple. You know, Cruise doesn't say that he's getting too old for it. Neither his character doesn't. But the film shows that he can't just stop accepting these impossible missions. Like, it goes as far as to explain why his marriage didn't work. When Luther explains to Ilsa, who's watching the world when Ethan is watching his wife? Hunt has this sort of manically suicidal tendency to leap off of rooftops without looking and rush through intersections at top speed. Like, okay, how many times can a guy get that perfect, because honestly, at some point, I feel like he has to have gotten hit. But he dangles from these heights where even like the slightest miscalculation would mean death. But as long as his wife is alive, and now that even extends to Ilsa, he's going to risk it all to protect them. It's all about that one life over the many. And just when you thought we figured out who Ethan Hunt was, McQuarrie redefines it. And we figure out what makes him tick. At this point, Ethan Hunt is just a regular Boy Scout, sort of against all odds action star who hesitates when he has to decide between sparing one life or saving millions. It's the morality that makes him tick. As far as his boss, Alec Baldwin, is concerned, it's an asset, but it also sort of fits in with Cruise's image as this moralistic idol. He's this unrelenting figure of perfectionism that ensures that he's going to save the day, even with 1 second to spare. In some cases, even less. In this movie, the villain isn't just a person, it's cynicism. You know, Lark writes this manifesto that insists that the world's become so corrupt that it needs to go through a profound act of tragedy to find peace again. And there's people in the government who agree with him, including his partner Walker, who clearly has no regard for human life the way Hunt does. It's an exciting foil. They're both tasked with recovering the plutonium, and they're both very distrustful of each other, similar to the man. And that sort of creates a sense of anticipation as we brace ourselves for the ultimate face-off at the end of this film. It's philosophical as much as it is exciting, because it's the school of one over the many compared to suffering for peace. It's the school of complete revamping versus wiping everything out to start over. The director of photography in this film, Rob Hardy, establishes the least intrusive technique of this film so far. You know, McQuarrie in this film has the confidence to let the material speak for itself. He doesn't go the John Woo route and just impose his style. McQuarrie's belief is in coherent set pieces. His combat scenes, they're tense. You know, they're clean, they're shot, and they're edited in a way that the geography makes sense. He puts the audience as observers over the actor's shoulders. At the end of the day, Ethan Hunt, he's not yet to meet an impossible mission. And for the thrill of work, audiences need to believe that one, at the end of the day, could get away from him. In this film, everything is put on the line. And because of that, this film is my favorite. Anyway, with that, thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. You can also follow us on Twitter at GSMC_movies. Thank you for listening. This has been Shubh Nanda, and take care.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.